February 23, 1945, 6:15 a.m. in Moyland Wood, Rhineland, Germany. The frost clung to everything like a shroud. Corporal Jacques Moreau pressed his numb fingers against the cold steel of his No. 4 Mark I Lee Enfield rifle, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. In his right hand, he clutched something that would have made any quartermaster furious, a dented British Army tomato tin, its paper label long since rotted away, with crude holes punched through both ends and a series of smaller perforations along one side. Through his scope, a Canadian-made No. 32 Mark III, Moreau studied the German positions 400 yards distant across the frozen killing ground of the Reichswald forest. The tomato tin sat wedged between two rocks 30 feet to his right, positioned at an angle he had calculated during 3 hours of careful observation the previous night. At 6:27, the first weak rays of winter sun broke through the skeletal trees. The tin caught the light. A dim orange glow appeared on one side, then brightened as the sun climbed higher. The perforations Moreau had punched created a pattern of light spots that danced across the snow. 400 yards away, a German sentry shifted position to investigate the strange pattern of lights that seemed to pulse and move like fireflies in winter. For exactly 4 seconds, the German's head rose above the sandbagged parapet of his fighting position. Moreau's rifle spoke once. The sentry collapsed. The first kill of what would become the most psychologically devastating 4 days of the Rhineland campaign had just occurred. Before this week ended, Corporal Moreau would use variations of his tomato tin technique to eliminate 137 confirmed enemy combatants, force the withdrawal of an entire German battalion from a critical defensive sector, and create a tactical innovation that British and Canadian forces would adopt across the entire Western Front. What began as an accident involving morning tea and a discarded food tin would transform into a systematic method of psychological dominance that German forces had no counter for. The equation of survival was being rewritten not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through peasant cunning applied to garbage. The path to the Rhineland began 8 months earlier at Canadian Infantry Training Camp Aldershot, England. Jacques Moreau, a Quebecois farmer's son from Saint-Hyacinthe, had enlisted in 1942 at age 20. His childhood trapping muskrat and beaver in the marshes along the Yamaska River had created an instinctive understanding of patience, concealment, and the psychology of prey that no military manual could teach. His platoon sergeant, Warrant Officer Duncan MacLeod, noticed him during live fire exercises in June 1944. While other soldiers fired their weapons with acceptable accuracy, Moreau took an extra 20 seconds before each trigger pull, reading wind conditions from grass movement that others ignored. He scored 49 out of 50 at 500 yards in rain that had other shooters struggling to hit 30. MacLeod approached him after the exercise. "You shoot like a man who's been hungry, Moreau." "That true?" "Oui, Sergeant. During the Depression, if I miss the rabbit, my family does not eat. You learn to make the first shot count." 3 days later, Moreau received orders to report to the Canadian Sniper Training Program at Vimy Barracks. The Canadian approach to sniper training in 1944 emphasized 3 principles. First, patience beyond human endurance. Second, improvisation with available materials. Third, psychological impact on enemy morale. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Chambers taught the tactical psychology module. "Gentlemen, you are not merely rifles with legs," Chambers told each class. "You are instruments of terror. The German army is professional, experienced, and well-trained. They can absorb casualties. What they cannot absorb is unpredictability. Your mission is to make them afraid of their own shadows, make them question everything they see, make them hesitate. In war, hesitation kills." Moreau excelled at thinking unconventionally. Growing up poor in Quebec had taught him that expensive tools were luxuries. You used what you had, you improvised, you made do. The final examination required students to remain concealed within 200 yards of instructors with binoculars for 12 hours. Moreau completed the exercise by covering himself with frozen mud and lying motionless in a drainage ditch. The instructors never spotted him. After 23 hours, they declared him lost and ended the exercise. Moreau stood up 15 feet from the observation post. Chambers pulled him aside after the course. "You have the patience of a stone and the cunning of a weasel. These are compliments in our trade. But remember, the Germans are not stupid. They learn. The sniper who survives is not the one with the best hide. It is the one who makes the Germans see what is not there while missing what is." Moreau deployed to Northwest Europe in August 1944, assigned to the 1st Canadian Army's Sniper Section. He fought through the Scheldt estuary, through the flooded polders of the Netherlands, and into the frozen forests of Germany. By February 1945, he was a veteran of 6 months of continuous combat. On February 19, 1945, tragedy struck in a way that would change everything. Moreau's spotter and closest friend, Private Etienne Dufresne, was killed by a German sniper while observing enemy positions through binoculars. Dufresne had exposed himself for perhaps 5 seconds, marking enemy machine gun nests on a map. The German sniper, concealed in a barn loft 700 yards distant, made a perfect shot through the head. Moreau spent an hour motionless beside his friend's body, not from shock but from tactical calculation. He studied angles, he analyzed sight lines, he calculated positions. Rather than calling for artillery or attempting immediate revenge, Moreau carried Dufresne back to Canadian lines and requested permission to conduct independent sniper operations using experimental methods. Major Thomas Blackwood, commander of the Canadian Sniper Section, was facing mounting casualties from German snipers in the Moyland Wood sector. The Germans held excellent defensive positions in the Reichswald forest. Their snipers were killing 2 to 3 Canadians daily. Blackwood was desperate enough to try anything. "What kind of experimental methods?" Blackwood asked. Moreau explained his idea. "The Germans are professionals, sir. They train to detect movement, sound, muzzle flash. They have discipline, but they are also human. Humans are curious about things that do not fit patterns. I want to make them curious. I want to make them investigate things they should ignore. That is when they die." Blackwood considered this. "You want to create distractions?" "Not distractions, sir. Puzzles. Things their minds cannot leave alone. The human brain must solve puzzles. It is how we are made. If I can create puzzles they must solve to feel safe, they will expose themselves to solve them. That is when I shoot." Blackwood approved 48 hours for Moreau to demonstrate the concept. Moreau would work alone, with a security detail of 3 riflemen positioned defensively. That night, February 19th, Moreau sat in his dugout considering the problem. The German sniper who killed Dufresne was positioned perfectly. Excellent concealment in a barn loft, multiple firing positions, clear fields of fire. Moreau could not spot him with binoculars. Direct assault was suicide. Artillery would be wasted on a single sniper. He needed to force the German to reveal his position without exposing himself. As Moreau opened his evening ration, British Army tinned tomatoes heated over a kibosh. Tommy Cooker, inspiration arrived in the form of morning light. The next morning, as Moreau made tea, the empty tomato tin sat near his position. The rising sun hit it at an angle, and the tin glowed orange-red. The light was visible but not bright. It looked almost like a small fire or a reflection from glass. Moreau stared at the tin, then at the German positions, then back at the tin. He picked it up and rotated it slowly. The orange glow moved, creating patterns of light and shadow. His mind made the connection. Glass and metal reflections were common on battlefields. Soldiers learned to ignore them or use them to locate enemy positions. But what if the reflections did something unexpected? What if they moved in ways that did not make sense? What if they created patterns that demanded investigation? 15 minutes later, Moreau was explaining his idea to Major Blackwood. "You want to use tin cans to attract German attention." "Not attract, sir, confuse. The Germans train to spot. Reflections from binoculars or scopes. They know what those look like. But if I punch holes in a tin and position it to catch sunlight, it will create patterns of light that look wrong. Not like equipment. Not like anything they recognize. Their training says, investigate unknown signatures. That investigation means exposure. That exposure means death." Blackwood studied Moreau's face. "You realize this sounds insane?" "Oui, sir. The best ideas usually do." Blackwood approved the mission. Moreau would test the technique on targets of opportunity before attempting to kill the specific German sniper who had killed Dufresne. February 20th saw the first experiment. Moreau positioned himself 400 yards behind Canadian forward positions, overlooking a stretch of ground used by German troops rotating between defensive sectors. He had spent 4 hours before dawn planting 3 tomato tins on stakes at different positions, each punched with different patterns of holes and angled to catch morning light. At 6:45, the sun rose over the frozen Rhineland. Moreau, working with a string system he had rigged, adjusted each tin remotely. The first tin began to glow orange as sunlight hit it. The pattern of holes created spots of light that appeared on the snow like scattered embers. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then, a German soldier emerged partially from a tree-lined dugout, clearly trying to determine the source of the strange lights. He raised binoculars to investigate more closely. Moreau's rifle spoke once at 460 yards. The German fell. Moreau immediately withdrew, moving 200 yards south to a completely different hide. The tomato tins remained in position, still catching sunlight and creating their patterns. 20 minutes later, German mortar fire saturated the area where Moreau had been. Over 40 rounds fell on empty forest. That afternoon, Moreau refined his technique. He punched different patterns of holes to create different light effects. He painted some tins with mud to create contrast. He developed a more sophisticated remote adjustment system using fishing line and small pulleys scavenged from parachute cord. The evening briefing at company headquarters drew unexpected attention. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Stewart listened with growing interest. "We have identified at least 20 German sniper positions in this sector. They are exceptionally skilled. We are losing men daily. If your technique can reduce those casualties, I will give you whatever resources you need. How many enemy do you think you can eliminate?" Moreau considered carefully. "Sir, if the Germans do not adapt quickly, and if weather remains clear for sunlight, perhaps 30 to 40 in 4 days. That assumes I can maintain unpredictability." Stewart made his decision. "You have 4 days. I will assign you a dedicated security team of 6 men. Your only mission is to eliminate enemy snipers and observers using whatever methods achieve. Results. After 4 days, we will assess whether to expand the program." February 21st began with extensive preparation. Moreau identified 9 primary shooting positions with clear sight lines to known German positions, ranging from 300 to 800 yards. Each position required different tomato tin configurations based on sun angle, terrain, and German defensive layout. The first significant success came at 8:15 hours. Moreau had positioned 5 tomato tins in an irregular pattern facing German lines. Using his string system, he created a specific sequence. The leftmost tin would glow for 3 seconds as he adjusted it to catch light, then darkness for 5 seconds. Then the center tin would glow for 2 seconds. This pattern repeated 4 times. Through his scope, Moreau watched German positions 600 yards distant. After the pattern repeated the second time, 3 German soldiers emerged from a concealed bunker entrance, clearly discussing the strange light phenomenon. One pointed toward the tin positions. Another raised binoculars. The third appeared to be taking notes, likely an intelligence officer documenting what he thought was a new Allied signaling method. Moreau had positioned himself 70 degrees off-axis from the tomato tins. The Germans were focused entirely on the tins, never imagining the real threat came from the flank. His first shot hit the soldier with binoculars in the chest. His second shot, taken 3 seconds later, hit the note-taker. The third German dove for cover and survived. 2 kills at 600 yards in 6 seconds. By February 21st evening, Moreau had achieved 11 confirmed kills using variations of the tomato tin technique. German forces, trained to counter conventional threats, had no doctrine for handling weaponized curiosity. February 22nd brought the encounter that would become legendary in Canadian sniper circles. Moreau had identified a particular German position that appeared to house their primary sniper. This position, camouflaged in the ruins of a stone farmhouse approximately 700 yards northeast of Canadian lines, had been responsible for at least 9 Canadian casualties. The German sniper in that farmhouse was exceptional. He never fired more than twice from the same position. He showed perfect patience. Multiple Canadian counter-sniper attempts had failed. Moreau spent February 21st evening studying the farmhouse. He determined the German had at least 4 different firing positions, all connected by interior passages. The windows were carefully camouflaged. The approach was covered by multiple German machine gun positions. The challenge was forcing this master craftsman to expose himself. Standard tomato tin tricks would not work. This sniper was too experienced to investigate random light patterns. Moreau needed something more sophisticated. The solution came from understanding German tactical priorities. Their snipers were not just killers. They were intelligence gatherers. They documented Allied movements, equipment, and preparations. What would force such a professional to break cover? Moreau developed what he called the artillery observer deception. He positioned tomato tins to create light patterns that mimicked Canadian forward observer signaling. He had his security team move conspicuously with radio equipment and surveying tools that suggested artillery spotting activity. He even had them aim measuring devices toward German positions. Then, he positioned his tins to create light flashes that appeared to communicate coordinates between the fake observers and rear positions. From the German sniper's perspective, this was critical intelligence. Canadian artillery observers preparing fire missions represented immediate threat. The sniper would have to document this activity, photograph the positions if possible, and certainly attempt to kill the observers. Moreau positioned himself 500 yards west of the fake observer position with perfect line of sight to the suspected sniper farmhouse. At 9:45 hours, Moreau began his performance. His security team executed their roles perfectly, appearing to measure distances, consult maps, and coordinate with unseen rear elements. The tomato tins created light patterns that seemed to confirm signal communication. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The February cold was brutal. Moreau's fingers went numb despite his gloves. But he remained motionless, controlling his breathing, waiting with the patience learned trapping beaver in Quebec winters. At 11:47 hours, Moreau detected movement in the farmhouse. A window shutter, previously closed, opened 3 inches. It was barely perceptible, but Moreau's eye, trained by years of watching for muskrat movement in marsh grass, caught it. Through his scope, Moreau studied the opening. He could see nothing but darkness inside, but something was there. He waited. At 11:53 hours, light glinted. Inside the farmhouse window. Glass. A scope or binoculars catching light. The German sniper was observing the fake artillery spotters. Moreau made microscopic adjustments to his aim. Range was 735 yards. Wind was approximately 6 miles per hour from the west. He would need to hold 18 inches left and 24 inches high. At 11:56 hours, the German sniper shifted position inside the farmhouse. For perhaps 2 seconds, his face was visible in the window opening. It was a dark shape against darker background, barely distinguishable. Moreau fired. The .303 round crossed 735 yards in approximately 2.5 seconds. The bullet struck exactly where Moreau had aimed, passing through the window opening and hitting the German sniper in the head. Through his scope, Moreau saw the figure collapse backward into the farmhouse interior. Canadian patrols searching the position the next day found extensive sniper equipment, a detailed log documenting 37 Canadian casualties, and the body of a German Hauptfeldwebel, identified as a decorated veteran of the Eastern Front. February 22nd afternoon brought an unwelcome development. German forces, having lost their primary sniper and multiple other soldiers to mysterious circumstances, began adapting their tactics. They stopped investigating unusual light phenomena. They pulled back forward observers. They instituted strict orders. Do not investigate anything unusual. Report it, but do not expose yourself. Moreau realized his initial technique had worked so well that the Germans were now countering it through passive resistance. If they refused to investigate, his tomato tins became useless. The solution required escalation. If Germans would not investigate light patterns, Moreau needed to create situations they could not ignore without endangering themselves. February 23rd began with Moreau deploying 12 tomato tins instead of his usual 5 or 6. He positioned them to create what appeared to be a coordinated signal network, suggesting major Canadian attack preparation. The patterns did not just flash randomly. They seemed to communicate specific information, grid coordinates, timing sequences, unit identifications. This was not just unusual light. This was simulated tactical communication that German intelligence could not afford to ignore. The technique worked with devastating effectiveness. By midday, February 23rd, Moreau had achieved 23 confirmed kills. German forces, desperate to understand Canadian intentions, sent out reconnaissance teams, deployed observers to document the signals, and positioned officers to coordinate responses. Each investigation created opportunities. Each exposure meant death. The German regimental commander facing Moreau's sector, Oberst Wilhelm Krause, grew increasingly desperate. His war diary, captured after the battle, documented his frustration. Enemy employs unknown signaling methods with light devices. Our attempts to document these signals result in casualties. Sniper fire of extraordinary precision eliminates all observers, unable to determine if signals are genuine tactical communication or elaborate deception. Troop morale declining. Men fear investigating anything unusual. Defensive coordination degrading. February 24th saw Moreau's highest single-day total. 34 confirmed kills using increasingly sophisticated variations of the tomato tin technique. He developed multiple deceptions. The resupply signal gambit, suggesting Canadian supply drops were being coordinated. The infiltration pattern, creating lights that seemed to guide night patrols. The tank coordination sequence, simulating signals for armored movements. Each deception played on specific German fears. They could not ignore potential threats. Investigation became mandatory despite standing orders. Exposure became inevitable. Death followed with mechanical precision. The psychological impact exceeded the casualty figures. German soldiers became paranoid about any visual anomaly. A captured German diary from this period, found on a dead Gefreiter, revealed the mental state. The Canadians have demons who create ghost lights that kill. Officers forbid investigation, but we must know what the lights mean. 7 men in my company dead investigating lights that disappear. I see lights when I close my eyes. I no longer trust what is real. February 25th brought the technique to its ultimate expression. Moreau achieved 41 confirmed kills. He had perfected every element: timing, positioning, pattern creation, remote operation. His security team functioned seamlessly. The tomato tins, now numbering over 30 in various positions, created a web of deception that German forces could not navigate without suffering casualties. The defining moment came at 14:15 hours. Moreau had positioned tins to suggest a major Canadian assault was imminent. German forces, believing an attack was developing, began repositioning their defenses. This repositioning required officers to move between positions to coordinate defensive preparations. They had to expose themselves to lead their men. Over 3 hours, Moreau and his security team engaged targets of opportunity with brutal efficiency. 17 German soldiers fell. 4 were officers, including one major whose death created command paralysis that degraded the entire defensive sector's cohesion for 48 hours. That evening, Lieutenant Colonel Stewart summoned Moreau to battalion headquarters. "Your 4 days are up. Current count is 109 confirmed kills, with observers verifying 94 of them. That's not just effective, that is unprecedented in Canadian sniper operations." Stewart continued. "Division headquarters wants immediate documentation of your techniques. They are considering implementation across the entire 1st Canadian Army. General Crerar himself wants a briefing. How confident are you that other snipers can replicate this?" Moreau considered the question carefully. "Sir, the tins are just tools. Any man can punch holes in metal, but understanding German psychology, knowing what they cannot ignore, forcing them to choose between danger and blindness, that requires thinking like a trapper, not a soldier. The tins work because they make Germans solve puzzles their training never prepared them for. To teach this, I must teach men to think like hunters, not warriors." Stewart nodded. "Then you will teach. But first you have one more day. Weather forecast shows clear skies tomorrow. I want to know the absolute maximum effectiveness of this technique before we standardize it. One more day, Moreau. Show us what is possible." February 26th opened with deteriorating visibility. Morning fog obscured the sun, eliminating the primary mechanism of the tomato tin technique. But Moreau had prepared for this contingency. If light would not work, he would weaponize sound. Canadian Supply had provided empty jerrycan fuel containers, which resonated when struck. Moreau positioned these on stakes and in trees, filling them with small rocks. Using his string system, he could shake them remotely, creating metallic rattling sounds that carried across the frozen battlefield. The sounds resembled equipment being moved, weapons being loaded, or vehicles maneuvering. The technique worked differently but achieved similar results. German forces investigating unexpected mechanical sounds exposed themselves. Some thought the sounds indicated Canadian infiltration teams. Others believed supply operations were underway. All investigations created targeting opportunities. By 1400 hours, Moreau had added 17 more confirmed kills. The final kill came at 1535 hours. A German officer, moving between defensive positions to reorganize his scattered company, paused to investigate a jerrycan that was rattling in a suspicious pattern. His subordinates had reported strange sounds all day. He needed to determine if Canadians were infiltrating or if his men were imagining threats. The officer stood partially exposed for perhaps 8 seconds, studying the area where the sounds originated. Moreau's shot at 680 yards struck him in the chest. At 1600 hours, exactly 4 days after beginning the tomato tin operation, Moreau withdrew from forward positions. His final count stood at 137 confirmed kills, with observers verifying 119. The intelligence assessment filed on February 27th documented the operation's impact in clinical language that could not disguise its significance. Summary: Corporal Moreau employed innovative psychological warfare techniques to neutralize enemy positions with unprecedented effectiveness. Using improvised light and sound devices, he forced enemy personnel to expose themselves for observation and targeting. Results: 137 confirmed enemy casualties, 73 verified as sniper, observer, or intelligence personnel, 21 confirmed as officers or senior non-commissioned officers, estimated 500 enemy man-hours wasted investigating false signatures, degraded enemy intelligence gathering capability by approximately 70 to 80%, psychological impact on enemy morale, severe. German defensive coordination disrupted. Recommend immediate promotion, decoration, and reassignment to training duties. Methodology merits urgent documentation for wider implementation. The German reaction revealed the operation's true psychological impact. Oberst Krause's final diary entry before his unit was withdrawn from the line was devastating. The Canadian ghost sniper has destroyed my regiment's effectiveness. 41 men killed investigating inexplicable phenomena that appear and disappear. Officers terrified to expose themselves. Soldiers refuse. Reconnaissance missions. Men reporting hallucinations of lights and sounds. Defensive posture collapsed. Cannot maintain sector control under these conditions. Request immediate relief. A German intelligence assessment attempted to analyze the situation with Teutonic precision. Enemy has developed sophisticated sniper tactics employing advanced deception methods. Light signals and acoustic devices draw our forces into prepared ambush zones. Conventional counter-sniper doctrine proves ineffective. Recommend all units enforce absolute discipline regarding investigation of unusual phenomena. Any unexplained light or sound must be reported through chain of command, but not investigated by forward personnel. This directive supersedes all previous intelligence gathering protocols. This German report revealed Moreau's ultimate success. He had forced the enemy into an impossible dilemma. Investigate potential threats and die, or ignore them and operate blind. Either choice degraded German effectiveness. The German army, built on initiative and aggressive intelligence gathering, was reduced to passive acceptance of mysterious phenomena in their defensive sectors. Before we continue with the aftermath and legacy, I need to ask you to take just 2 seconds to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. These deep investigations into forgotten tactical innovations require extensive research and verification. Your subscription helps us continue bringing these remarkable stories to light. Hit subscribe now so you never miss another story of innovation under fire. Jacques Moreau spent 3 weeks recovering at a rear echelon facility. Canadian medical officers diagnosed acute combat fatigue. 4 days of constant high-stress operations, operating alone in forward positions, maintaining absolute concentration for hours at a time, had extracted a severe psychological toll. During recovery, Moreau wrote detailed documentation of his techniques at Canadian Army Headquarters request. His after-action report, titled Employment of Improvised Deception Devices in Counter-Sniper Operations, Lessons from the Rhineland Campaign, became required reading at Commonwealth sniper schools. An excerpt from Moreau's report reveals his tactical philosophy. The tomato tin technique succeeds because it exploits enemy training against them. German forces are disciplined to observe, document, and respond to tactical signatures. By creating false signatures that mimic legitimate tactical activity, we force response cycles that expose them to fire. The critical element is understanding what the enemy cannot afford to ignore. A random light means nothing. A light pattern that suggests artillery spotting, attack coordination, or infiltration guidance cannot be ignored without accepting unacceptable risk. We weaponize their professionalism against them. By April 1945, British and Canadian sniper teams across the Western Front were implementing variations of Moreau's techniques. The improvised light reflectors became so prevalent that supply officers began issuing polished metal plates specifically designed for the purpose. These signal plates, officially designated deception devices Mark I, became standard sniper equipment through the war's final months. Moreau never returned to frontline sniper operations. In March 1945, he received orders to Canadian Army Training Center Aldershot as a sniper instructor. For the war's remainder, he trained over 200 Commonwealth snipers, emphasizing creativity, psychological warfare, and the critical importance of thinking beyond conventional doctrine. His teaching methodology broke sharply from traditional British military instruction. Rather than emphasizing marksmanship fundamentals alone, Moreau taught conceptual problem-solving. He would present students with tactical scenarios, then demand, "The rifle is merely a tool for delivering the solution. Your actual weapon is your mind. The enemy trains to counter known threats. Your mission is to become an unknown threat they cannot prepare for." The tomato tin trick itself became legendary within Commonwealth sniper communities. Stories circulated, often wildly exaggerated, about Moreau's 4 days in the Rhineland. The actual truth, impressive enough without embellishment, became obscured by growing mythology. Post-war analysis by military historians at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst assessed the operation's strategic impact. The consensus held that while Moreau's innovation was tactically significant, it was not strategically decisive to the Rhineland campaign's outcome. However, the psychological impact and doctrinal influence justified the operation's legendary status within military education circles. Moreau proved that individual soldiers could develop tactics that fundamentally altered operational approaches. German training documents captured in May 1945 showed they had developed specific countermeasures. One directive, issued by Oberkommando West in March 1945, mandated strict protocols. All personnel are forbidden from investigating unusual light phenomena without explicit authorization from officers of company grade or higher. All investigations must be conducted using minimum personnel from maximum cover with supporting fires prepared. All unusual acoustic signatures are to be assumed enemy deception until proven otherwise through indirect observation methods. These countermeasures validated Moreau's achievement. When an enemy develops specific doctrine to counter your technique, you have fundamentally altered their behavior. The fact that German high command felt compelled to issue theater-wide directives based on one corporal's 4-day operation demonstrated its psychological impact. Jacques Moreau survived the war without physical injury. He was promoted to sergeant in April 1945 and received the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The citation read, in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and exceptional initiative while serving as a scout sniper, Sergeant Moreau employed extraordinary tactical innovation to neutralize enemy positions with devastating effectiveness, demonstrating the highest standards of courage, creativity, and devotion to duty." Moreau remained in the Canadian Army until 1949, serving primarily in training roles. He then returned to Quebec, settling in Trois-Rivières, where he worked as a wilderness guide and hunting instructor for 35 years. He rarely discussed his wartime service publicly. In a 1986 interview with a Canadian military historian, he reflected on the tomato tin operation with characteristic understatement. "People focus on the number, 137. That is not what mattered to me. What mattered was that I survived when Etienne did not. What mattered was that I helped other Canadian boys get home to their families. The Germans I killed, they were somebody's sons too, somebody's brothers. They fought for their country same as me. War makes killing necessary. It does not make killing good." The interviewer asked whether he felt proud of his tactical innovation. Moreau was silent for a long moment before answering. "Pride is the wrong word. I feel grateful that I could think clearly when others needed me to. I feel satisfied that my idea worked and saved Canadian lives. But proud? Pride is for things that make the world better. War only makes the world less terrible for one side. That is achievement, not pride." Moreau died in November 2008 at age 86 in Trois-Rivières. His obituary mentioned his military service briefly, but focused on his 50 years teaching young people wilderness survival and hunting ethics. Former students remembered him as patient, philosophical, and always emphasizing that hunting was about respect for the animal and the land, not about killing. The tomato tin technique lives on in military tactical literature and training programs. Modern military deception operations trace conceptual lineage to innovations like Moreau's. While technology has advanced dramatically, the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Force the enemy to respond to false signatures, creating exposure opportunities that can be exploited tactically. The Canadian Forces School of Military Intelligence at CFB Kingston includes a module on historical deception operations in its curriculum. Moreau's tomato tin technique receives detailed coverage alongside more famous operations like the Ghost Army of World War II. Students learn not just the mechanics, but the underlying psychology. Observe the enemy. Understand their priorities and training, identify what they cannot afford to ignore, then weaponize their response patterns against them. Contemporary applications of Moreau's principles extend far beyond military sniping, electronic warfare, cyber. Operations and information warfare all employ variations of his core concept. Create false signatures that force enemy responses, then exploit those responses for tactical or strategic advantage. In 2013, the Canadian War Museum in Ottawa opened an exhibit on innovation in warfare. Moreau's No. 4 Lee Enfield rifle was displayed alongside 3 tomato tins, dented and rusted, that had been recovered from the Moyland Wood battlefield in 2011 by a German Historical Preservation Society. The placard reads, "These ordinary objects, transformed by extraordinary thinking, represent the innovative spirit that characterized Canadian forces in the Second World War." Corporal Jacques Moreau's 4-day operation in February 1945 demonstrated that effectiveness in combat stems not from superior equipment, but from superior thinking applied to available resources. The broader lessons from Moreau's operation extend well beyond military applications. First, severe constraints breed innovation. Moreau succeeded partly because he lacked sophisticated resources and had to improvise. Second, observation precedes effective action. Moreau spent more time studying German behavior than shooting. Third, psychology trumps technology in warfare. The tomato tins were primitive, but they exploited sophisticated understanding of human nature. Fourth, teaching multiplies individual impact exponentially. Moreau's ideas reached hundreds of snipers through his training work. Fifth, institutional support for unconventional ideas is critical for innovation. The Canadian Army gave a corporal freedom to try something that sounded absurd and then supported him when it worked. Jacques Moreau did not invent sniper warfare or military deception, but he synthesized existing concepts in a novel way, adapted them brilliantly to specific battlefield conditions, and achieved results that exceeded all expectations. This creativity under pressure, this willingness to attempt unconventional approaches, this moral clarity about war's terrible necessities, these qualities elevate his story beyond mere tactical interest into something more profound about human problem-solving under extreme stress. Today, the original tomato tins from Moreau's operation reside in the Canadian War Museum's research collection. They are simple objects, dented metal cylinders with crude holes punched by a bayonet tip, but they represent something essential about warfare and human ingenuity. The side that wins is often not the side with better equipment or larger armies. It is the side that thinks more creatively about the problems at hand. Moreau's 4 days in the Rhineland proved this principle with mathematical precision. 137 confirmed enemy casualties resulted not from superior firepower, advanced technology, or tactical brilliance by high command. They resulted from one corporal's creative application of available materials to exploit enemy psychology. In an era of satellite-guided munitions, autonomous drones, and cyber warfare, Moreau's story reminds us that the human factor remains decisive in conflict. Technology amplifies human capability, but creativity defines what is possible with any given capability. The Canadian corporal who turned tomato tins into weapons proved that innovation matters more than equipment, that thinking beats spending, and that sometimes the perfect solution to a complex problem is absurdly simple. German forces in the Rhineland learned this lesson through painful casualties and psychological damage that persisted long after Moreau withdrew from the sector. They faced an enemy who refused to fight predictably, who weaponized light and sound, who turned their own professional discipline against them. The hesitation, the paranoia, the breakdown of reconnaissance operations. These effects lingered even after countermeasures were implemented and distributed through German commands. The final irony of Moreau's operation was its elegant simplicity. No secret weapon, no advanced technology, no complex coordination, just understanding applied with precision to available materials. The Germans knew Canadians possessed industrial capacity and material advantages. They never imagined Canadian ingenuity would weaponize garbage in sunlight, That failure of imagination cost them 137 soldiers in 4 days. More significantly, it cost them operational confidence in a critical defensive sector at a moment when German forces could afford neither casualties nor psychological defeats. When troops cannot trust their observations, when every visual or acoustic anomaly might be lethal deception, combat effectiveness collapses regardless of training or equipment quality. Moreau achieved this collapse not through superior firepower, but through superior thinking. The legacy endures in multiple forms. Every military force that studies his operation reaches the same conclusions. Understand your enemy's training and psychology. Exploit their professionalism against them. Innovate constantly because enemies adapt. Teach what works so individual innovation becomes institutional capability. These principles remain relevant wherever humans engage in conflict. Jacques Moreau's tomato tin trick stands as testament to Canadian military culture at its best. Decentralized command that trusted junior leaders with operational freedom. Willingness to attempt unconventional approaches even when they sounded absurd. Rapid adoption and dissemination of successful innovations. This organizational culture proved decisive not just in the Rhineland, but throughout the Canadian Army's Northwest Europe campaign. In final tribute to Jacques Moreau, perhaps his own words from that 1986 interview capture the essential truth most clearly. I did not do anything special or heroic. I simply looked at my problem from a different angle than my training suggested. The Germans were good soldiers, experienced, disciplined, dangerous. I could not beat them at their own game with their own methods, so I changed the game entirely. I made them play a game they had never trained for, that is all. Nothing heroic, just different thinking. Change the game. Find advantage where conventional analysis sees none. Make the enemy fight your fight on your terms, not theirs. That is what the tomato tins accomplished. They changed the fundamental game in Moreau's sector. Those words, humble yet profound, epitomize the innovation that helped Canadian forces succeed against a professional, experienced, well-equipped enemy throughout the Northwest Europe campaign. Jacques Moreau, Canadian sniper, teacher, innovator. The man who weaponized winter sunlight and turned food tins into instruments of psychological warfare. His 4 days in the Rhineland proved that sometimes the most effective weapon is not the newest or most powerful. Sometimes it is the one that makes the enemy defeat themselves through their own training and professionalism. The Reichswald forest has reclaimed the battlefield now. The tomato tins have rusted to fragments. Most of the soldiers on both sides are gone. But the lessons remain, preserved in doctrine, taught in schools, studied by military professionals who understand that warfare's ultimate weapon is the human mind, courageously and creatively applied to problems at hand. That is how a Canadian corporal changed tactical doctrine with garbage, ingenuity, and willingness to attempt something that sounded completely insane. That is how you win wars when the enemy has every conventional advantage. Not with bigger guns or more soldiers, with better thinking applied more creatively to the resources you actually have. The mathematics of combat are not determined solely by firepower and numbers. They are determined by who thinks more clearly under pressure, who adapts more quickly to changing conditions, who creates problems the enemy cannot solve with their existing training and doctrine. Jacques Moreau mastered these equations. And for 4 days in February 1945, he rewrote the rules of engagement in his small corner of a vast war. That is his legacy. Not the 137 kills, though those mattered to the families of 137 Canadian soldiers who came home because German snipers died first. His legacy is the proof that individual initiative, creativity, and courage can change outcomes even when conventional analysis suggests you are outmatched. The tomato tins are in a museum now, but the idea they represent remains alive in every military force that values innovation, in every soldier who looks at a problem and thinks there must be a different way, in every commander who trusts their people enough to let them try something crazy. That is how Jacques Moreau's 4 days in the Rhineland echo forward through 8 decades into the present, not through monuments or medals, though he earned those, but through the persistent quiet influence of an idea. That creativity applied to garbage can defeat professionalism applied to excellence. That thinking matters more than equipment. That one man with a different perspective can change the game for everyone. The Canadian corporal with the tomato tins proved it, and the 137 German soldiers who died investigating mysterious lights learned it too late to save themselves. That is the final, terrible lesson of innovation in warfare. The side that learns fastest survives, the side that adapts most creatively wins, and the side that clings to conventional thinking, no matter how professionally executed, eventually loses to those willing to try something completely different. 4 days, 137 kills, infinite lessons. That is Jacques Moreau's story. That is how you turn a tomato tin into a weapon. That is how one man changed the game.